So I read that, I kind of like pieced together that you actually come from a musical family. So I'm just curious, like, how is that growing up with a musical family and the influences of that into your, starting your education in the oboe?
Absolutely. Yes. My parents are both musicians, not professionally, but by life. They're lifelong musicians. And I have two brothers, one older, one younger. And so we all played instruments growing up. My dad is a composer. And so growing up, I thought everybody had a musical family, instruments were everywhere, and your dad was a composer and he wrote music for your family. And I realized pretty quickly when I got to college that's not the case. But also my extended family, I have my aunt has been a violinist in the Columbus Symphony in Ohio for 40 years. And so that was like my earliest model of you can be an orchestral musician for your job. And so, yeah, growing up, it was part of the landscape. Everything was centered around music. And when I was actually 6 or 7, I started recorder and actually had like little lessons on recorder. And then when I was getting towards age 9, where we were living, that's when you started to think about playing an instrument. And my parents were thinking they were going to have me play flute. And they said, well, there's too many flute players in the world. You're going to play oboe. And I was like, that's cool. What's an oboe? And, I mean, they just handed me the oboe and that was going to be my instrument. Kind of the same thing happened to my brothers too. So, but the oboe chose me really. It came very naturally to me and I just loved it and it was fun and I got good at it pretty easily. And, but I didn't like to practice. So there was just this household though, that was the expectation. That's what you did. And that really set the foundation that I needed to be really supported. And I realize now very privileged in that support to just, have everything I needed to pour into me as a young musician.
So then you went to Eastman before going to Rice, and I read that you would organize concerts, and I was curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, I guess part of just that confidence I had, and support that I had always had. I think I remember being that, undergraduate student, and I just was like, well, if I want to do something, I'm going to be able to do it. I'm just going to make it happen. And I think also I just had this drive to create work for myself. I'm a very driven and energetic person. I love collaboration. And while I wouldn't have had the words when I was 19, 20, 21 to describe it that way, looking back, I realize that's always been part of me. So for instance, my dad's a composer I mentioned. And so that was an opportunity for me to maybe pull together premieres of his works. And in order to do that, sometimes I needed to be on the podium and I needed to conduct and get an orchestra together and bribe my friends in pizza to come do this recording session. But I really exercised my musical self. It was an expression of who I was as a young leader. And for me, it was just fun. And I kind of just loved the problem solving of figuring out all the details to, coerce people to get together and then what they needed in order to pull off a really fun event for everybody. And it also just gave me the opportunity to do more repertoire that wasn't being given to me as an option to begin with.
So I know after Rice, you were looking at internships in the Kennedy Center, and obviously you ended up in operations, but it said you were originally looking at music ed. And so I was wondering, like, was that kind of similar, like this type of leadership thing, was that where that was inspired from?
Yeah, so I went to Rice and it was 2 years for my master's and I was practicing for auditions, trying to start teaching lessons. And then my second year at Rice, I had the opportunity to be the student director of their chamber music series for kids, Jump, Just for You music program. And that was awesome. I was like, if there's a job doing this, this is maybe something I want to do. It's so fun. And for all the reasons I mentioned before, it was collaborative, it was inspiring and creative. But I got to program 6 chamber music concerts for kids in K through 4. And I got to coordinate with the schools and bring them into our recital hall at school, at Shepherd School. And I programmed the concerts, hosted, emceed, performed, recruited my friends. And it was, again, I just found that I think it's really that engagement with kids and just sharing of music was at the heart of it. So it was less about me. I mean, yes, I really was enjoying private teaching, but it was less about me being in a classroom and more me about just being able to engage people in the participate in the art type of side of things. And so, yeah, I applied to every internship at the Kennedy Center that had the word education or outreach in it. I didn't even care what it was. It might have been dance, it might have been theater. It just, I was like, maybe that's where I need to be. And in the process, the internship program said, we think you might be really well suited for operations at the National Symphony. I said, that's cool. What's operations? Because there's a lot of ground we could be covering, I think, for our music students about how an orchestra works behind the scenes, which is what we'll get to talk about later in our time today. But I just had no idea, but it ended up being a really good fit because it's all about concert production. It's all about that bringing everything together for the main event. So it ended up being a great fit that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you had this really strong drive to kind of give back and you started to see that, in your education and now you're kind of applying for these other roles with other job titles. Was that challenging for you or did that feel kind of natural?
It was challenging and it wasn't overnight. It was over time. I mean, like I said, when I arrived to Rice, it was 2 years till graduation. And that first year, I think I was probably fully immersed in audition prep. I took auditions, I advanced, all my friends were doing the same thing. And I was like, okay, this is where it's really getting real. I got to find a job in my career. And, but became very obvious very quickly. If I was going to I knew I could do it. I mean, I never questioned that I could do it or not, but I also knew what it was going to take in order to achieve that. And I became less and less convinced that I wanted to sacrifice I felt like it was going to have to sacrifice these other parts or put these other parts of me on hold. Because I just started to explore and, with the chamber music series for kids and everything. And so those seeds were starting to be planted earlier on. And then when I got to graduation, I didn't have a job. Surprise, you might not have a job by graduation, and that's okay. So I kind of just felt open. I just felt like open. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what direction to go. I went and lived with my mom and dad after graduation because I didn't have a job. I didn't, I was like, I'm just going to see what happens. And what I'll say is that internship was an open door that flung open in front of me that I was like, okay, I don't have anything else to do. Let's see what this is like. But then the next crossroads was really, I got a job part-time at the Pittsburgh Symphony in operations right after that internship. And probably because of that internship and all the work I'd done. And it was part-time. And then 2 months later, they offered me full-time. And that was a real point of crossroads for me. I was like, oh, wow, 6 months ago, I thought I was going to be an oboist. And now I'm at the Pittsburgh Symphony, which is awesome. But it's at this desk job that I didn't even know existed, that I don't know really anything about yet. But I felt like, okay, I'm supposed to be an adult by now. I should probably take the salary and benefits. Let's just see what happens. And I kind of just kept having that adventurous, that's the word I'm using right now, attitude about it. But I just was like, I can't take this for granted that this is being offered to me. And let's just see what happens. And then from that point on for the next year, I grappled and wrestled. I was like, I'm supposed to be an oboist, but I'm at this desk job. And the situation it created for me was failing daily because I didn't have my oboe in my hands, right? As musicians, we get so used to being good at what we do. And as much rejection as you get with audition circuits and all the things, but like that was my home. But then without it in my hands, I didn't know how to work in an office environment or how to work with people. And I was not doing a good job. And so about a year in, that was really becoming apparent. And my boss sat me down and said, hey, look, you're not doing well. We know you can, but it's only if you really 100% commit, but you have a decision to make. And she gave me the weekend to think about it. And I came back on Monday. I said, I would be a fool not to learn everything I possibly could from the Pittsburgh Symphony. This isn't what I imagined, but this is the Pittsburgh Symphony, and you're giving me a job. And I can't deny that that is an amazing opportunity. So here I am 15 years later, and I love this work, but it was not overnight. It was not a quick transition, and it was very hard.
I really think it's important that our listeners hear that, because we talk about the story. We always kind of like skip around to how everything worked out, but we don't necessarily pick at like how long that took and what you were feeling during that process. But so for those people who are going through it right now, like they can relate, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will say it felt really important to me in that time when I was really wrestling. I was like, I want these musicians to know I'm an oboist. I went to Rice. Like, it was like, I felt like, very connected to them. But at the same time, all of a sudden I found myself on the management side of things that I knew nothing about and didn't really understand the dynamics. So that was a really hard identity crisis for a while, that took some time until I really was like, you know what, let me give this operations thing a shot. And I love it. I mean, I find ways to bring my oboist self to work every day. But I also say my superpowers are timelines and checklists. So I'm okay with that.
So did you feel like the pressure that you're putting on yourself to like make this decision was like internal, or did you have any external besides like social pressures to like be on this one track? It's like really hard in this environment to see it any other possibilities. So I'm just like, I don't know, I'm wondering how you overcome that kind of pressure, whether it's from yourself or others.
Yeah, well, I was a one-track mind. I mean, from age 13, well, what the part of my story I skipped was when I was 13, I started studying with Ray Still, who was the principal oboist of the Chicago Symphony. I was 13. Like, so at that age, it was cemented in my mind, that's what you do. You become an orchestral musician. And I had the best one in front of me, right? So I was a one-track mind. And so I wasn't looking for other options, but I don't think that there's a whole lot of awareness being shared, which is what I'm trying to do with my passion project. But like, there's not a lot of awareness being shared. And I don't think it's because, music schools, are keeping anything or hiding anything. It's just that I feel like immersing in the art and becoming the best musician you can is the first step to becoming a great administrator for an orchestra, in my mind too. So I feel like I don't regret any part of my path. I mean, I feel like but where I feel like it's really important is that there's a risk involved if we're saying this is what success looks like. And there's a risk involved in saying, if you get in an orchestra or if you don't perform, you teach, right? And if you don't perform, you teach, maybe you'll work on a staff. I believe my job is a destination job. And I think there's folks out there and students like yourselves out there who are like, I don't know about being in an orchestra and being on stage. That doesn't feel like the right fit for me. Am I a failure? No, you're not. I want you on my team. Like, so that's where I'm at right now, is meeting a lot of students I'm meeting a lot of students in this place where they're questioning those things. Am I a failure? And I'm like, nope, let's see what your superpowers are. And there is something out there for you. And orchestras need as many people working off the stage as there are on the stage. And I think that's one of the awareness things that people don't realize. I didn't. So I think it's really important that we in the industry are ready and willing to be reached out to. I think that you guys are doing a phenomenal job busting through and breaking open the awareness of all the jobs available for musicians, and I think that there's no one quick fix to it all. It's all of us being ready and all of us constantly questioning what the options should be and what they can be. But I think there's more that we all can be doing to make sure everyone's finding their best fit career.
Yeah, we also wanted to highlight specifically women doing these things, because I feel like sometimes we don't always meet women doing these things or know about them, and kind of just like giving certain women a voice to talk about these things that they've learned and are now doing can be really helpful to our listeners.
Yeah, I'm, it's interesting. I feel like just a few years ago, when I went through the Emerging Leaders Program at the League of American Orchestras, we had that was my introduction to the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And, it was really interesting. There was this questionnaire that we did, to try to raise this awareness in ourselves. And it's like, which of these privileges do you enjoy? I went to college. And there's all this whole list. And because I would say, for a long time, I'm like, I don't understand the issues of, women in leadership roles. And I don't feel like I've ever had these issues, these challenges, or, it was a very privileged mindset. And so I realized that I get to be the vice president of operations at the Nashville Symphony now, and I'm in a leadership role, but it's not without a lot of folks, a lot of people going before me, a lot of people supporting me, and a lot of people advocating for me naturally. And so I don't want to take that for granted ever. And so I really am trying to question the ways that I may have been supported that other people don't have, maybe a mentor or an advocate, and how I feel a real strong sense of duty now to be those things. But for most of my career, I was kind of oblivious to that whole layer of my life. And so, yeah, I think there are certainly still challenges, and there's, equal pay is, probably is becoming more awareness around the issues around that. But I think for a long time, I didn't realize the challenges that a lot of people maybe had. And I just had this very privileged, unquestionable confidence about me, like, yeah, of course I'm going to do that if I want to.
And you talked about, wanting to have feeling that duty to make it better for other people and help other people. And so is that where, because I know you have your website and that has so many great resources. So is that where that started?
Yeah. Back in 2017, I don't know what spurred it. I was reading some book like 12 Steps to Start Your Own Business. And this woman was saying, become the content expert on something. And I was like, do I really know anything? Like, I started this blog, or OrchestraOperations.com, because I've also never seen anything in print about the work that I get to do around concert production and serving the musicians of the orchestra, learning the union contracts and all the contracts. And so I just was starting to write articles, because I've always had interns and always, intersected with students, but I was like, let me just start seeing if I have any knowledge that would be helpful. And so yeah, that's where that became apparent, that I just wanted to start sharing. But it wasn't until this Emerging Leaders Program where I had just transformative experiences, but they asked the question, what will be your contribution to the industry? And I'm like, wow, that's like the entire orchestra industry. Like, but my answer came pretty quickly, is I want to equip students better. And so I didn't know what that looked like. And that was 3.5 years ago. But I just started to look for ways. I didn't want to make assumptions about how students weren't being supported, because it'd been a long time since I was in school. So I just started talking to a lot of students. But I realized more and more, there still is this lack of awareness. There still is these opportunities for risking, students' mental health about, am I a failure because I don't fit in this mold? And then as I learned about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging challenges, that, then I was like, okay, hold on, reset. I've not gotten to where I am on my own. And I need to do everything I can to make sure that people can get to where they are. And I want them, I don't want to just, there's that image where you like reach behind you and you help bring people up the ladder, but they're not going to just stop here. I want them to like exceed where I am. I just feel very strongly about that. So OrchestraCareers.com is what I was kind of the outpouring over a couple of years of work to what I decided I was going to create and try. And it was going to be resources about all the careers available off the stage. I love career like coaching. I love helping with job searches and resumes and cover letters and interviews, all these things that are really super awkward and hard. I just love doing those things because I felt like I had a lot more insights as a hiring manager because I've hired people, I've stared at piles of applications, and I've formed opinions about what I think people should be sending me, and they're not. And so why don't I just give students all the answers that they're going to need to get every advantage to get onto the path to their best career? And I'm hooked. I'm like obsessed. So I'm just really grateful for, just the encouragement I've had and the enthusiasm that people have shared in with my enthusiasm for this work. And there's not a lot of people focused on it. So there's an opportunity for me to just really pour into this area. And so, yes, it's been, again, a multi-year journey, but I'm really excited where we're at. And now I feel like I've got like the footing and the foundation to really make a bigger impact than I could in my job at my orchestra. So.
Yes, and I can attest to that because after your talk with the Rice students, I was talking with one of my friends and we were just talking about how amazing it was because both of us had kind of gone through this during the beginning of the pandemic, especially being like, what is going to be on the other side of this? And kind of like how would we even go about doing anything but performance? So it was like really great to hear your story. And I'm also wondering, because one thing I find interesting and it kind of is reflected in everything you've done is like this idea of like constantly evolving and growing, which I've always thought about in terms of like my bassoon playing, but you're doing it in like your life things and just kind of starting with, your transition to operations and then now all of this work that you're doing to make classical music a better place. And I'm just curious, like, I don't know, is that conscious or does it just kind of happen? How do you think about it?
I think as musicians, we are wired really well and equipped really well for some really transferable skills, but they're not explicitly stated to us as that when we're studying music. As musicians, we are really great project managers, actually. Think about a recital, think about an audition. You've got a deadline by which you have to accomplish this much work. And you cannot learn pieces overnight. So how are you going to manage your time? How are you going to structure just the strategy to accomplish these things? Who do you need to bring into your world so that you can accomplish this recital? It might be a collaborative pianist. I will say my senior recital or any recital I realize now that I did had all my friends on it. Like I could not do something by myself. I was so collaborative and like probably overextended myself more times. Very ambitious recital programming, but we're really good project managers as musicians. If you can realize what it actually takes and how you actually do that, and translate it without your instrument in your hands, I realized I was really well wired for that. I would also say I'm very collaborative. I'm always seeking feedback from others. And the most, I would say, familiar illustration of that is chamber music, right? And we're always told chamber music is great team building, but we're kind of like left at that. It's like, well, but how? And I, as an oboist, I felt like, frankly, no offense to any of my friends out there in the world, every woodwind quintet I ever had was dysfunctional. We could not figure out how to, for the life of us, rehearse because we're 5, principal players trying to accomplish one thing together. So I think that there's more that we could do to explicitly share and teach actual teamwork and leadership in those musical settings. But if you think about it, how do you play in tune with someone? What do you have to actually do? You don't insist, right? You don't insist on your tuning. You have to yield. You have to listen. You have to, I remember a teacher once explaining, think about their sound coming out of your bell. What is that? That's empathy, right? And so if you can think about the lessons we learn as musicians, they actually are the lessons we need to learn and translate off the stage. And that did not happen overnight. I mean, I've been in this business now 15 years, and it's only like in the last year, I'm like, mind blown. I know how to do these things. I've just never been looking to the actual core of my musicianship to teach me. Because we're not taught that way. We're taught about the oboe, about whatever your instrument, the bassoon, you know, and it's not obvious. But the last thing I'll say about this and my musicianship and how it's really equipped me is my brother is the horn professor at West Virginia University, and he ran the Northeast Horn Workshop. And he said, "Hey, Sonja, would you come present?" And I was like, "Sure, I'm not a horn player. You know that, right?" And I thought about it. He wanted, you know, just with the work I've been doing with students. And I thought about it, and I called him up later and I said, "Okay, how about this?" Because I'm a music geek, music nerd. Learning to transpose a story moving from musician to manager. And I did this whole presentation about how I've had to transpose my skills and transpose the skills of a musician to becoming a manager. And the solutions to our problems actually are all the same. They just look really different on and off the stage. So that I really love that, because actually that's now informing how I can encourage people like yourself as you're thinking about this transition, when you're like, I'm 22 and I've just spent my entire life planning to be a bassoon player, and how can I make this transition? We can do it. You're already equipped in a lot of ways. It's just getting used to talking about it out of the context of playing the bassoon. So I'm really excited, because I think that a lot of music students are really well positioned to transition to offstage careers. And it's not without some work and some mentorship and some coaching. But I think once we all make those connections, I hope that the result is encouragement.
When I was first thinking about how we would change this in schools to make it so that people don't feel so boxed in, I was thinking it would be like classes and different like things, which it could be, but also like reframing the skills we have from our performance training so that we don't feel like we have nothing to give in any other aspect other than our instrument, which is really beautiful.
Well, and I think it all serves this, you know, each other. You know, if I become a better leader, I'm going to become a better chamber musician. If I, you know, and that is the path to becoming a better musician, is learning great leadership and teamwork and conflict management and problem solving and project management and time management. I don't think, and becoming better at those things would make me a worse musician ever. I never practiced enough, is the thought I had in college. And I just don't think I managed my time well. And I just didn't understand how to prioritize and how to be strategic. And there's real critical thinking skills that I think translate into those situations, but they do directly feed your musicianship. And so I think there's more explicit ways. That's what I think is the key to teaching those things that support us as musicians, that then they're explained in a way that you can apply them to any situation that's in front of you.
So in terms of, you know, shifting music schools so that they have more of this emphasis on kind of like big picture things instead of just like a narrow focus, what do you think that looks like? Like, how do we develop that?
I think about this a lot. And I don't think it takes that much. I think it's a mindset and perspective. I think it's inviting people in the industry of a variety of different careers in to talk on campus. I think it could look like asking folks like myself, what are you seeing being required of your musicians? And I think that's really where some of my reflections started, was a couple of years ago. I was like, you know, the job that we are asking our musicians to do is not what I was trained for in music school. Our seasons as professional orchestras are 14 weeks of classical programming, 8 weeks of pops, probably 6 weeks of education youth programming, and then there's movie series and there's summer programming. What if we did a little bit more of a mix up? You know, it doesn't have to, I mean, I guess I want to be very careful to say music school is really well crafted to make you a great musician. And I think immersing in the art is the best way. And you need a time and a season just to become your best musician. And there's so much you can learn from Mahler and Beethoven and Brahms. But let's not forget about the context under which we're all entering into this industry, which is not just that. Community engagement, being able to speak about why you love Mahler, just asking each other, what do you love about that piece on your recital? And just because I think our musicians today are, the value they can bring to an organization if they can speak about what they do means dollars in the door, because donors eat that stuff up. They want to participate in the art. They want to know what makes musicians tick. They want to know how old your instrument is. When did you start that instrument? Why do you love this piece? What's hard about it? How do you prepare for it? And so just getting students practice and tools and equipping them to speak well. It might be media training, honestly. Where that mindset started with for me is like, why can anyone just put a microphone in front of their face and they say stuff and they're ready to go? It's because they have media training. It doesn't happen automatically, but there's an expectation set that you're going to talk about what you do because that's important to our community organizations. And so I think it's, like I said, just connection to the industry for real-time info about what's happening in the industry. It's explicitly talking about those skills. And I think it's also just giving students opportunities to exercise those skills in the setting that you have. And the last thing I'll say is, I think there could be one class, one semester, one workshop, seminar about the business of orchestras. What I mean by that is nonprofit arts management is its own animal. And every musician is going to walk into an organization that is a nonprofit organization. And there are going to be decisions that are made because there's a business plan and there has to be budget goals and, you know, balanced budgets. And so where that became utterly important to me and is this last year when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. We knew exactly what our cash position was, and not knowing how long this was going to last, the board had to make the decision that we were going to furlough the entire orchestra and 50 of our staff members. And I was one of 19 left. And all of a sudden, all these people are losing their jobs and don't understand why, because we haven't taken ownership over the context, and we haven't done our best work to really make sure everybody understands. But I think there also needs to be a willingness to learn the landscape you're stepping into. Our industry has evolved and the challenges are not getting simpler, they're getting more complicated. And so I guess I'm just wired also to want to know the big picture. And so I find it easy for me to judge when I don't see that, and that's bad. But like, I think we're not entering a world where we're just going to be served classical season opportunities, and it's much more engaged than that. And that's what our communities want. They want us to be engaged with them and meet them where they are. And they want us to look more and be more minded about, more conscientious of what our community looks like. So there's just all these factors that are much more holistic and organic and comprehensive than I think we're prepared for when we graduate with a music degree.
Yeah, and I kind of follow up on that. Because I've thought a lot about how, so like music schools prepare us to, or at least I've thought about how music schools prepare us to go into the way the industry is now. And so like in terms of like inciting change, like where, if it starts with like music schools preparing their students with all of these skills that they would make the industry better, or like the industry like requiring in some way, like I don't know if that looks like a different kind of audition process or some way to like make it so that the musicians that are there are like able and capable of like engaging with the community in meaningful ways and building the audience. And so I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, and I want to be really careful. I do not believe the solution is only resting on the shoulders of music schools.
Yeah.
Our symphony orchestras could be doing a lot to reach out to music schools, and a lot to be ready to just fill in those gaps. And so I feel like it's going to take us all to want this enough to because we all have to step up to the plate. We all play a part in it. There's no one place that ownership rests. But I think it is just recognizing that the world is changing, and we need to be more relevant and contemporary about the ways we're engaging with each other. And we can't take any of that for granted. The world continues to change. Clearly, we've all lived through a lot of change in the last year. And so I think it's just about being more open. Maybe it's about music schools considering themselves part of the community already. Maybe it's orchestras considering themselves as stewards of the industry and feeling a duty and a necessary readiness to shepherd the next generation in. I mean, I think it's all of those things, but I think we're all in this together. And I think if there's one thing the COVID-19 pandemic threatened was this legacy and this kind of carrying forward the torch of orchestral music in our communities. There was an existential crisis for our organizations, but I think we're coming out of it. We're coming out of it stronger and smarter and more ready to link arms and be ready to do it together. And it's been a humbling experience, I will say, but I think it's just I think it's believing that that's what it's going to take, and we can't just do it the way we've always done it. So, we're all learning in this process. We've all been humbled in this process. I think about it differently, but I really feel like pouring into the next generation is one of the best things that we could be doing, because we're not all going to be carrying the mantle of this industry forever by ourselves. And if we're not like filling in those connections now, I think we're really setting ourselves up to not be prepared to continue to handle the challenges that will be in front of us.
Yeah, I just love how you're describing all of this, and the way you frame it, it just makes it seem so hopeful. And that there is something really great to look forward to in the future. And us as musicians who are a part of this field, like that's so refreshing to see someone who has a vision that we can fit into, that we're excited about. And I'm really curious. So you work for Nashville Symphony now, correct? Yeah. So what are some things you are thinking about now, like implementing into the Nashville Symphony to create this new kind of atmosphere?
Yeah, well, first is just making sure we get our musicians back on the stage. That's number one. It's core and center to what we do, because music is what we are here for. And I would say, so just getting back to that place where we're financially able to just move forward. And we're getting ready to announce next season, and it's very exciting. And I am an optimist, and there is hope. Orchestras will be around forever. We just have to work harder to make it happen. But I think the other thing is, and I started seeing our industry a couple of years ago really start to think about how we can be for our communities more, whether that's embedded in our communities. But the key component is not prescribing what our communities need, but actually asking what they need from us. And we are ready. We are starting that process. We started it before, and then COVID happened, but that is essential to our organizations surviving, being relevant, and being meaningful to our communities. Is we can't assume anything. We have to humble ourselves enough to go out and ask the neighborhoods that we haven't been in, what do you need from us? How can we serve you? And not just come in and drop and do a concert and leave, but what do you need? We're a service organization. That's really at the heart of what our organizations are. And, I think what's really exciting is the ways I've seen musicians branch out. whether it's, just to express the other sides of themselves as part of their communities, whether it's volunteering at dog rescues or at food pantries or running other, starting other parts of themselves as businesses or content creators. Like, I love seeing the three-dimensional parts of musicians, and the way Instagram is like around and different. Like, I feel like it's such an exciting time. What I'll say is, we can't just be robots about creating concerts. Our communities don't want robots. They want people. And the way we do that is we engage each other as people, and we serve each other through sharing music, and we learn from the community, and we give back. And patrons really want to know you. They want to know you, Kelsey and Julianne, like, what makes you tick, and they want to know where you live. I mean, I've been at the playground with my son, and I strike up conversations about the symphony, and it's so fun, right? And it's we just have to be willing to be really committed to our communities, because it makes life much more fun, number one. And then they're going to feel that we're so meaningful that the next crisis that strikes, hopefully, like, they're so committed to us too, that they're willing to step in and help us survive, because the art needs to be around. So it's a lot, but I just, I want everybody to love each other. and I have this secret plan to take over the world, which is just to make sure that everybody knows we can't get through this, in isolation. It's together and through community.
Kind of switching gears, because I want to make sure we hit this before this ends. I do want to talk about like operations and, what your job is and what you do, so that people can understand and have more, like, obviously I think everyone appreciates that side of thing, but doesn't actually know what's occurring. So can you talk about that at Nashville?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I started the work of operations, if you think about your local orchestra, there's many concerts that happen. And, at the orchestras I worked at Pittsburgh and Nashville, there's 40, as in 40 weeks of concerts. Every week is a different concert. And my work in operations is making sure that the musicians have everything they need on stage: chairs, stands, Wagner tubas, glocken, harpsichords, pianos, stage space, lights, the climate on stage, like anything around the actual logistics of the stage. That I've been part of thinking through those details. Now, if I just mentioned the concerts are different every week, you have to get really good at learning what details do you need to have finalized when, so that by the time rehearsals come, you've thought of everything you can, and now the musicians can just walk on stage and do what we want them to do, which is what we love, music, right? Thankfully, early on, I was trained in that internship at the Kennedy Center. That the work of operations is thinking about all the details, communicating everything the musicians need, so that they can just walk on the stage and think about playing their instrument. So it's all the logistics around the stage. It's thinking about the flow of the concert. It's thinking through what I'll say like a run sheet. Okay, so we have a welcome announcement, and then tuning, and then the conductor walks out, and then we play the overture, and then there's a stage change, and we need a piano for the piano concerto, and then there's a 20-minute intermission. And then there's a symphony, and we have to wrap everything up in time because we're under a union contract. So it's time management, project management, people management, to make sure everything's running also under the rules that are governed by the union contract. So I have to know that really, really well. And then I've also been involved in long-term planning. We're always planning the next season when we're in the season we're in. We're always planning 2 seasons out. And everything that we are building has to start under that framework of the union contract, which has all the different provisions about how we can schedule the work of the orchestra. So I work very closely with the artistic team, who manages all the content of the concerts, right? The repertoire, the programming, the artists, and the conductors. And so I don't deal necessarily with the content, but what they program directly influences what I need to prepare. So if I see Symphonie Fantastique by Berlioz on the repertoire, I know we need to get those Berlioz bells, the church bells that hit backstage, and we have to rent those. So it's very tactical, very practical, my head luckily thinks in calendars and timelines and checklists really naturally. So I kind of love it, but I need a knowledge of the repertoire that when I see certain pieces, I'm like, oh, we've got to think about the offstage oboe, or we have to think about how to fit 102 musicians on stage plus a chorus for Mahler too. You know, it's just, you have to know those things as well. So I love it. It's a lot of puzzle pieces. It's a lot of problem solving. It's a lot of knowing the framework you get to use to work within that. But it's working with people and it's serving the musicians backstage. My office hours are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday normally, and I'm in meetings and I'm here when the orchestra is here. And when there's a rehearsal, I go downstairs to be downstairs because my office has also always been at a concert hall, which I can't take for granted. And I go and check in with musicians, make sure they have everything they need. I hear the tuning A, I come back up to my office, I work on some more plans and preparations for things 4 months down the road, and I go downstairs at break to check in with the musicians. And you know, they're an incredible group of people. There's 80 individuals, but they're all one orchestra. So there's kind of just the challenges of working with a group and working with individuals. But I love getting to know people, and I think it makes the work very meaningful.
Yes, thank you for giving us that overview. I think that that's really cool, and you get to interact with the musicians, which I think is like probably the coolest part, or at least from my perspective. So the last thing we want to ask you is, what advice do you have for our listeners? And that can be, from just your overall life and like the thing that helps you the most, or what you'd want someone to know that you didn't.
Yes, I thought about this, and I'm going to pick two things. One is trust your gut, meaning you owe it to yourself to lean into your individuality. We want to see it. And that maybe what I mean by that is what career path you're going to pick, what place you're going to live, who's going to be your friends. It is worth it. We've all made those decisions that are someone else's decisions. Run your own race, lean into your individuality, because in the end, that is going to make for the more fulfilling life. And it's really, really hard. But you owe it to yourself, because you're worth it, to lean into that individuality and what you know to be true. And number two, you can lead from where you are right now. And this is something you can practice right now. As a student, you can lead yourself, which is really important to learn how to do. You can lead your peers, and by leading, I mean problem solving and being open-ended about what the possibilities could be. But also in the effort to get stuff done, you're going to have to use leadership to get there. And so lead yourself. Right now, you can lead your peers. You can lead your professors. You are your best advocate, is what I mean by that. When you lead up, you are your best advocate. No one cares about what you care about more than you care about it. And so just know that. Don't be offended by that necessarily, but just know that you actually have a lot of power to advocate for yourself. And again, I'm trying not to say that from a place of privilege, but think about that for others, and think about the ways that you can be advocates for your friends, and the ways that you can right now mentor underclassmen if you're upperclassmen. Right now, how you can check in on that friend who seemed to be having a hard day. Like, life is better together. It is not worth getting to the top of the mountain by yourself and being alone. Like, I want all my friends around me. Like, so that's where I've gotten to. And I don't think that I always was focused on that, was focused on achievement and, getting the right gold star and all the things. And those are important, but not at the risk of sacrificing community and individuality.
I just love everything you just said. It was just so great. And I think for a lot of us, maybe we're so used to drilling in that achievement mindset, and it works for a while, right? But then you kind of hit this point where it's not working anymore. It's kind of like tapped out, and you start to question like these other ways of creating fulfillment in your life and another driving force. And I think what you just said is essential. It's community. it's support, it's getting there as a team. I think that's like the next step that people take after they realize the achievement mindset has limits.
Well, and I'll just say, be careful how you define success, right? How we define success is going to dictate what we're driving towards. And I've had to learn later in my life, just in the last few years, that scheduling a massage on Saturday, that is an achievement. And it's going to make me a better mother and a better leader and a better, friend if I'm taking care of myself. And I don't feel like that was really taught to me, like in those formative years, like exactly how to do that. And so, you know what you need, you ask yourself what you need in the moment. And that is going to directly impact how you can serve others.
Thank you again. This was amazing.
Yes, thank you so much. I can't wait for people to see this.